This video was not brought to you by Raid Shadow Legends because I'm not a fucking loser. So, we just witnessed the United States Grand Prix last weekend, held around the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas, and what a freaking race. It kind of had everything we could ever ask for. A Ferrari 1-2, with Charles Leclerc once again proving to the watching masses why he's a born-again Gilles Villeneuve, George Russell siding through the field and putting on a clinic for all those to watch, Franco Colapinto once again pushing Alex Albon higher and higher up the fraud scale, Liam Lawson getting points on his not debut after starting from 19th on the grid after having not raced in over a year against a teammate who is well established in that outfit. If I keep waxing lyrical about this lad's performance, I'm gonna start speaking in tongues. And he also found the time to engage in some beef. Haas have once again become serious and are proving that maybe they really are America's team after all. I'm sorry about the slander earlier this year. And finally, we had a great tussle for the podium between title contenders Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, which culminated in Lando getting a penalty after a myriad of instances where things like this went unpunished or got differing penalties. So what the hell's happening here? And why is it happening? Yeah, this video is going to be about this, but it ain't gonna be what you expect it to be. So, what's the deal? To get to the root of the problem, we've first got to lay down some basics. I'm here gonna bring up 3 instances over the race that had varying degrees of reaction from the stewards. First case, the start. Max goes down the inside, passes Lando for the lead, and escorts him wide on the exit of the corner. Second instance, George Russell passes Valtteri Bottas for P whatever it was, and likewise forces him off the track. And finally, we have the one that everyone's talking about, Max carting Lando wide once again toward the tail end of the race. Although this time, Lando boots it into the runoff and got out ahead of Max. For this time, he would not be vanquished by his fellow Belgian. That is very basically the crux of these incidents, and yet this one went unpunished. This one resulted in a penalty for George here, and this one resulted in a penalty for Lando. On the surface and out of context, it don't make a lick of sense, at least not to the eye of the average earthling. So, how, what, when, why, who, which... Donkey! Let's break these down one by one. The first incident, first corner, first lap. Now, I'm not sure why, but it seems that every year, it's a habit for drivers to be forced out wide at this corner on the first lap. After all, it is a bloody acute corner that is way tighter than it seems. Don't take that out of context, please. So, if you were way to the inside of the corner on entry, even on full lock, it's not too much fun trying to get that thing around there. It also seems that every year we've had these shenanigans going on, they've gone unpunished. Almost NASCAR-like rules in a way. So, in that regard, it seems that the precedent has been set. But here's where it gets tricky. By way of racing law, Max technically was ahead at the apex by length of an ant's dick, thus giving him the right to the corner. But the law also states that the overtaking car must give adequate room to the car that they just overtook, a law written as a result of Max himself when he escorted Lewis into Paraguay in 2021 at Interlagos. Why was that not applicable here? Well, I'm guessing because of the circumstances of that corner in that particular instance on that particular lap. The stewards have never been quite clear on that, so the water is somewhat murky with this incident, and you can understand the angst amongst certain fan bases. But when all is said and done, everyone knew that Max was gonna send it on lap 1 at turn 1, because of course he was. Everybody knew. Well, everyone except for Lando. The smart thing to do may have been to bait Max to the inside of the corner, allow him to overshoot, perform the switchback, pull his pants down, and run off with his crown. And it does seem like, in hindsight, Lando knows that too. But after that first corner was over and done with, that rulebook would come into force. Which brings us on to the second incident, George Russell versus the guy he replaced. George goes down the inside, makes a pass on Valtteri, escorts him wide a bit, and was subsequently issued a 5-second penalty. So why was this a penalty? Well, in accordance to the driving standard guidelines, when making an overtake on the inside, said driver must not force the other car off the track and must leave a fair and acceptable width for the car being overtaken. They said that that did not happen here, but at the same time, instead of a 10-second penalty as per standard for these kinds of offenses, they would issue a 5-second one instead because, firstly, it wasn't deliberate, and secondly, that George was in control at all times. Okay, so fair enough. A discount coupon for when a driver wasn't being a full-blown menace. us. Fair enough, the stewards outlined that. The line is in the sand, which then brings us on to the third and final example, Max and Lando. Again, the one that caused all the fuss. Let's take a big bite into this shit sandwich, shall we? So, like Russell and Bottas, it's the same corner, but a different penalty. This time it would be Lando who would incur the wrath of the stewards. And some may still be asking, why? So the argument is that he overtook off the track because, of course, unlike the one with George and Valtteri, it was the outside car who was actually instigating the overtake. But ever desperate not to lose the podium, Max either braked later or let off the brake a bit, got his car a hit at the apex, while Lando just kept the boot into the runoff and just yeeted that position away from him then and there. By the time Max got to the apex, Lando had effectively lost the right to that corner, or so the ruling says. So to just hang around the outside, mash the gas and overtake off the track does seem like apt enough reason for the stewards to issue him that 5-second penalty, right? Otherwise, we just have drivers making up their own racetracks and arguing that they were forced off based on the precedent set if this type of move was allowed, right? Well, yes, but the argument of my car was ahead at the apex is also a slippery slope. Like, let me put it to you this way. Back in 2001, the V8 Supercar Series in Australia made a ruling where if you were overtaking someone, if your car was up to the B-pillar, the middle of the car, you had the right to the corner. If the Donny being overtaken got spun off, it was their own damn fault. What ended up happening was that drivers would absolutely yeet down the inside, smashing drivers into walls, only for the overtaking driver to say, "Don't blame me, I was up to the B-pillar." Fast forward to the present day, and there's not much stopping a driver from either letting off the brake or just braking later to just poke their nose ahead into the corner to game the system and maintain position. Is this method rancid? A little bit, maybe, but it's not exactly illegal. He's merely gaming the system, operating at the edge of what is allowed, just like every other great sports person in history. Having said that, in this particular instance, he didn't really remain on the track himself, although he wasn't technically overtaking, but then you remember what was written into the rules owing to a similar incident a few years ago? Yeah, this whole thing is a can of worms. Some took the chance to use this incident against one of the stewards that weekend, Derek Warwick, although it may not be a great idea to tear down his credibility over a call that you don't agree with. If your ability behind the wheel is enough to have the great Ayrton Senna veto you, you might know a thing or two about racing. But is the argument of having permanent race stewards rather than the current method of whoever they found at the airport a fair one? And would it lead to more consistent calls across the board? Yes and yes. Although we have been talking about that since the time that humans discovered fire, and the people who run the sport ain't done diddly to take the initiative on that one. But as much as we would like to debate as to whether this was a good or a bad call, whether Max's driving was rancid or not, whether it's healthy to watch Michael Bay films with the naked eye, the problem that I want to bring up is not strictly about any of those things. So, the FIA mandate that racetracks across the globe, especially ones aiming for Grade 1 approval, be designed with parking lot runoffs. Sure, it is safer for cars that suddenly develop an urge to travel backwards, but it has encouraged drivers all over the globe to take the absolute piss by accelerating into said runoffs to seek an advantage, taking risks that they wouldn't even dare to do on any other tracks. Take Monza for instance. Hang around the outside at the Lesmos if you dare, but you do risk ingesting more grass than a medium security prison. So then, why don't tracks replicate what the ramp boring has done, putting gravel right to the edge of the track, a natural detriment to straying wide? The only corner really that didn't have said feature was the only one we seem to have a problem with. It sounds great, but the issue is that motorbicyclists prefer the paved runoffs, as do everyday Donnies who drive their cars around here on any given Sunday, not wanting to scratch the paintwork on a car that they inherited so hard for. And said gravel that was brought in for that Austrian Grand Prix was subsequently removed for the reasons that I just brought up after the event was done. So sure, we can look at changing the rules regarding overtaking and defending again because of Max's gymnastics. Do that if you so please. But running people wide was not an isolated issue that weekend, as well as the examples that I brought up. Both Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly also got penalties for ushering drivers off the track, but you also had drivers hanging around the outside because they knew there was little consequence of going over the white line. A big way we're going to stop this nonsense is by a self-policing system, one that doesn't need the intervention of a human's interpretation of a rulebook. But as we've also seen, it's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. Any solution that you put in to stop this issue from happening ends up being cancelled out for an equally good reason. So what the hell do we do? I got it. So Fit the cars with plastic explosives and a gold watch. If you stray wide on exit, it arms the bomb, and it can only be deactivated after traveling at or below 60 miles an hour, or in other words, the top speed of a sailboat, for 10 seconds, with a special override system that can be unlocked by summoning the ghost of Dennis Hopper. And in the interest of fairness, if said driver was forced off the track, the offending driver in that scenario would be locked in a salt factory overnight with Art the Clown. Granted, it may not be the safest idea, but at least it's not as dumb an idea as accepting a sponsorship from Raid Shadow Legends.
Like a ship